How you doing?
Hey everyone, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Thanks for joining us. Are you in New Jersey? Is that where you're at?
No, I'm in Maryland.
Maryland. All right.
Yes. But Wyatt, I went to college up in Rochester for my grad school. So I was like seeing the Sabres jersey in the background. I was like, yeah, I like it.
Yeah. What college?
St. John Fisher.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Well, we're going to transition then to the next part of our meeting. We got our guest on, Rob Filon. Rob, this group, just as a quick reminder, is a bunch of young people anywhere from, I think our youngest now is 13. We just added Danny, who's not on the call right now. And then our oldest, I think, is 24. So they're kind of in that age range, high school, college, or right out of college. And they all have one thing in common. Maybe they have more than one thing, but definitely one thing in common. That is early financial independence, which in my mind is something that very, very few young people have their sights set on or even know exists. So this is kind of like an elite group of young people who are absolutely crushing it in many, many different ways. This group also happens to be very highly interested in real estate investing as one of the ways to achieve early financial independence. But they also are into passive income, entrepreneurship, side hustles, frugality, mindset, all kinds of cool stuff. And they are kind of the exceptional young people out there, which is why we call them freaks in a good way. And then, so Rob, what we typically like to do when we have a guest on, but it's not set in stone. If you have a different idea, just let us know. But we'll kind of have you tell your story for about 10, maybe 15 minutes, somewhere in there. Kind of your background, what you currently do, tell us about your website and your business and your association with journies. By the way, real quick, all of you out there, raise your hand if you know of or follow or listen to the podcast journies. How many of you know that? So maybe about half. So Rob, definitely fill them in about that community, because I'm a huge fan of journies, and they need to know about it. So you can incorporate that into your introduction about yourself. So I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes, Rob, and it's all yours.
All right. Well, hey everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. As Dan said, like, you guys are definitely an exceptional group in terms of what you are thinking about and how you're thinking about the world. I've taught personal finance at high school for 6 years now, and I don't think I've come across one student yet who's doing what you're doing, like where it's really caught them on fire and they're like, you know what, I'm going to change the game. I'm going to do this differently. So just the fact that there's, a group of you, like there's 19 or 17 of you guys on the call tonight, and you're all interested in doing things a little bit differently. Like, that is just awesome to see. So my name is Rob Phelan. I'm a high school math and personal finance teacher in Maryland. On the side, then I have a lot of different things that I venture into. I would classify myself as kind of like a serial entrepreneur, where I like dabbling in different things. I like learning new skills. I'm always trying to challenge and push the boundaries of what I can do or what I thought I could do. And so what I'm currently working on right now is I have a company called The Simple Startup, which is originally a workbook that was going to be sold to schools to help teachers do, or even club representatives do, entrepreneurship projects for their kids. I was using it in my own classroom. I was like, okay, this is useful for someone else. And I decided to publish it. And then that turned into an entrepreneurship summer camp last summer when there was just nothing else going on. And ran that with 60 kids, got great feedback. It's like, all right, I'll try this again. And I kept running them and I kept selling them out. So it ended up being something that just happened to come across my lap, where I was like, okay, this is a business that seems to be in high demand. There are actually more of you out. You just kind of have to cast a wide net to find them. And then my current project right now is I'm working on a children's book called M is for Money. And this is my kind of mini experiment into like, how does publishing a book, like not a workbook for schools, but like an actual book, how does that work? And that's kind of the reason I'm doing it, is like, I was curious, like, all right, well, how do you actually publish a book? And then I had this kind of kids book idea in my head. In terms of side hustles, I'm currently red like a lobster because I spent 8 hours in the lacrosse field yesterday. So I side hustle as a lacrosse official, and it's one of the best paying side hustles you can do where you're actually like working out as well. I think you get paid $60 an hour. And I was on a field for 8 hours yesterday, and I could have done another 8 hours today if I wanted to. Like, it's a great way to make extra income, particularly if you have some savings goals going on.
Wyatt is showing you his lacrosse shirt there, Rob.
Well, I ref girls lacrosse, Wyatt, so it's way cooler than what you do, but kudos to you for playing.
Fair enough.
And then, there's a bunch of other things I've tried and I've shut down where I'm like, this is great. It makes money, but I'm not super excited about it. And I think as you guys are starting to figure out, this is about doing things with your time that really makes sense, really lights you up, because who wants to waste their time in a career that totally bores them, doesn't make enough money, doesn't satisfy you in some internal way. And real estate investing is obviously another way that you can approach that. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And then Dan mentioned about my affiliation with Choosify. Choosify is a financial independence podcast that's run by Brad and Jonathan down in Richmond, Virginia. And that started with just two guys who were like, you know what? We like personal finance. We like financial independence. Let's do a really cheap podcast and see if anyone else actually wants to listen to it. And in the 5 years since they've done it, it has grown to be one of the biggest financial podcasts out there. So I work on their foundation side, and the foundation is just a nonprofit that their mission is to spread financial literacy education. So I work as a curriculum writer for them as a freelancer. I think that covers most of my introduction. What do you guys got for questions, or where do you want to go with this, Dan?
Well, I have a couple of questions I'm going to throw out there, and then yeah, what we normally do is transition to Q&A from the members.
Sure.
Well, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? Were your parents into money? What was your household like when you grew up? And then, when did the switch really turn on for you about, to manage your money in a different way than what the norm is?
So I grew up, my parents are in Ireland, my whole family's in Ireland, and my parents moved to the US in their 20s to find work because Ireland was going through a mini recession at the time. So I was born in New York, lived there till I was 9 years old, and then my family moved us back to Ireland, and I did like high school there, undergrad, and then I came back to the US to do grad school, which is how I ended up in Rochester, New York. But in terms of my upbringing, no formal money education. I saw my dad lose his job in the 2008-2009 recession, which was really hard, but I also saw that they had savings. They never actually spelled it out that they had savings, but I noticed that my parents weren't panicking, and they clearly had some reserve of money that they were able to draw down on during that time, which I think I only just thought of that now. That was like, okay, you know what? That's actually an insight that I hadn't had before, that my parents did that. In terms of formal money lessons, not much. Like, my parents taught me to save my money, when I got it. So I had a bank account when I was probably like 7 or 8 years old. I had like a custodial bank account, and I could take my money into the bank, and they gave us like a little paper passbook that you could like fill in how much money you deposited and track your balance. And then I also remember being told, like, if you wanted something, you had to go earn it. So my parents weren't big on handouts. I think it's because they didn't have a ton of income themselves. Like, they weren't a particularly high income earning jobs. My mom was a nurse. My dad was, I don't even think he had a undergraduate degree. I think he had an associate's degree, but he worked as an engineer in New York in like a sewage treatment plant or something like that. So both my parents had like an hour-long commute to go from like Long Island into their jobs in the city. And then I don't think they had a ton of income, but my parents didn't discuss it. So I actually have no idea. And they still wouldn't discuss it with me, even if I asked them. So for them, money was very much like a off the table conversation. We don't really talk about that. They passed on some lessons. There was some like, you should do this with your money. Don't do this. I remember asking my dad once, like, what's a stock and can I go buy one? So I had an interest at a young age in buying a stock. And I think my question kind of got brushed off because he didn't know what to do. So I actually didn't start investing until I was 27 years old. What got me into money was I had moved to the US. I had met my wife. I was working as a math teacher. And my wife was actually more knowledgeable about money than I was at that point. I was actually really ignorant about money, particularly in the US when it came to like tax rules and how a 401k worked or any of that stuff. Like, I didn't really know anything about it. And she kind of told me like, I don't like this imbalance in the relationship. I feel personally responsible for all the financial decisions, and I want you to learn more about this. And at the same time, my school asked me, hey, we've got a personal finance / math class. The teacher who's doing it is leaving. Do you want it? And that was the moment where I said, yeah, I'll take it. I don't know a thing about money, but I will go learn. And I think that's when the switch really flipped, that I started learning about personal finance. I started following Dave Ramsey. Is that a familiar name for most of you guys? Dave Ramsey? Okay. So, really strong personality, very good for his audience, I will say. Like, there is definitely a place in this world for Dave Ramsey. I found that I outgrew Dave Ramsey, and a lot of the financial independence community feel that way, that once you get out of debt and you feel like you're in control of your money, or you're in control of your money from the beginning, there isn't a ton there that Dave has to offer you. And I was finding that same thing, and I wanted to find more. So I started delving into other podcasts, other sources of information, and I came across the financial independence community, which was just like when my head was like, yes, this is what I want. I don't necessarily want to work as a teacher for the rest of my career. I like it. I'm pretty good at it, but I'm not one of these teachers who is, I guess I don't feel called to it. So like, I don't feel like there was this magical moment where I was like, you know what, I was born to be a teacher and I will never do anything else. And money doesn't matter because I just get such fulfillment out of my job. I like it. It's fine. It's great. I'm good at it. But I always want that option of being able to leave at some point in the future if I want to go pursue something else, or I just don't feel like going to work that day. I hate that feeling of I have to go do something, because if I don't, there are negative consequences to it. All right. What's next, Dan?
All right, Rob, thanks for the additional background. So what we'll do now is we'll turn it over to the group. And so, guys, I mean, Rob has, I think you can tell he's not like that old. If I remember right, Rob, like early 30s.
Yes, 32.
32. So he's not too far ahead of you, but he's done some really amazing things. I mean, you should pick his brain about entrepreneurship, starting a business, writing a book, publishing a book.
I will say, in terms of real estate, I am not involved in real estate in any way except for a couple of REITs that I own.
Yep.
So it's something that I'm interested in. It's definitely on my financial independence plan, but I'm choosing to build my foundation at the moment in terms of stocks and also entrepreneurship. So those are my kind of two sources of passive income for the future right now. And then real estate will eventually be added in. And that's something that you can all do. Like, you can choose your path when it comes to financial independence, and real estate can be the start. It can be the middle. It can be the end, but there's definitely a lot of, fun directions we can go with this. And I'm a very open person in terms of questions. There's very little that's off the table.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask him about side hustles as well. And for those who don't know the choosify community, which is an awesome, awesome community, I put choosify and bigger pockets, like they're equal. But in my mind, there's two distinct proven methods to reach early financial independence. One is basically putting money into index funds, and the other one is real estate investing. And you can do both or any kind of combination of those. Bigger pockets is obviously focused more on the real estate side. And I would say choosify is focused more on the index fund investing inside and having that sustainable asset withdrawal after you reach your FI number. So if you know the 4% rule, that's more the choosify community. Although they're very, there's a lot of overlap between those two. So yeah, lots of different questions you could be asking him, and he'll do his best to give you some of his experience and wisdom. So what we typically do, Rob, is we have them type their questions into the chat.
Okay.
And then you can just go top to bottom, read the question, and then answer as best you can, and then just keep going. And if you need to take a break, let me know, because that can be a lot of talking sometimes without any interruption, but we seem to think that works best. So
Dan, I'm a high school teacher who's just come through a year of pandemic. I have done nothing for the last year but talk to little Skittles on the screen. So yeah, it's been a year of monologuing. So this is actually really nice to have some faces on the screen and some questions, which is fantastic too. I didn't get many of those this year either. People
are engaged. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Rob and I connected, I would say at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, because we're both teachers. We're both high school teachers. We both teach personal finance, and we both have very similar missions. And we're both involved with early financial independence. So we have a lot in common too. All right. So I see some questions coming up in the chat. Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So first one from Seth. What was the first entrepreneurial venture and how did it go? So if we're going to talk about the very first time I tried to earn money outside of my own house, that was probably at 7 years old. I collected cans and glass bottles and I took them to a local bottle bank and got my like quarter nickel for those. So I approached my neighbors and said, hey, I'm trying to raise money for, this was like one of my big financial lessons as a kid. I wanted a train set. So like not like a little wooden one, but like an electric train set. I visited my dad's really dorky neighbor who had like a full basement full of trains. And as a 7 or 8 year old, I thought he was the coolest person in the world. So I wanted my own train. It was like a Lionel train set. And we went to like a collector's store and I also agree that the trains are pretty awesome. I was a huge Thomas the Tank Engine fan, and my son, who's now almost 2, he's also a huge Thomas the Tank Engine fan. But it was definitely a purchase I wanted that was very like there was no real thought process behind it. Like it was just like, oh, like I saw trains, I like trains, I want trains, which is how a lot of kids at that age, I think, feel about buying things. There isn't a huge like thought process that goes into it, or the idea of opportunity cost or saving your money for something else. So my parents, and kudos to them, didn't say, no, that's a really dumb purchase. They said, okay, it's $150. If you want it, you are going to have to find a way to earn the money for it. So I did not get an allowance growing up. Eventually they added in a thing called a chores list, which they put a couple of dollar amounts on. Most of my basic chores I had to do as just part of being a member of that household, but say like I went out and washed the car, something extra, I could earn a small amount for that. But this predated it. And my dad had probably suggested this idea like of collecting bottles and taking them to the bottle bank and getting my money for that. So that was my first, I guess, entrepreneurial venture. I also did a piñata business when I moved from New York back to Ireland, because piñatas were just not a thing in Ireland. It started with me having a birthday and I was like, I want a piñata for my birthday because that's what happened in all my other birthdays before that. And they just didn't exist. Is it piñata, Mexican tradition or a Spanish one? Whichever one it is, they just didn't exist in Ireland. Ireland is a very like traditional country. Like they have their own traditions. They don't really have much else coming on in there. So I made my own. I did paper mache on top of a balloon and painted it, made it into a character. And my friends, when they came to the birthday, were like, that's cool, I want one too. And of course they couldn't buy them anywhere. So they asked would I make them one. And that was my first taste of finding a problem and solving it for somebody else. It was very time intensive. It wasn't a huge profit margin. Like I might put maybe 10 hours into making one and I was selling them for like $20. So definitely not worth my time, but at least at the time, $20 or 20 euros in that case was a pretty decent amount of money. And then I guess my first big kid entrepreneurial venture, I did a tutoring company. So I bought 2 domain names, set up my stall for that, started advertising, and that was great. Except the only problem is tutoring is a hour for hour trade. Like, so you're just 1 hour equals time, and you can't really scale that out very much unless you're going to hire other people, which I wasn't interested in doing. So that was one that lasted a couple of years, and then it was good. It made money, but didn't light me up. All right, Ben asks, what's your investing strategy? Index funds, single stocks as well. So I currently own, I already mentioned REITs. So REITs are part of my investing strategy. I own stocks, I own index funds, and I also own a little bit of cryptocurrency as well. So it's a little bit of everything. In terms of my investing philosophy, my investing philosophy is 90% of my money has to be in US index funds, or also including international, but broad-based index funds. So my entire retirement account is made up of the total US stock market index and the Vanguard International Index as well. Then the last 10%, I can venture out and I can try different things. So I probably have 7% in individual stocks, and I own about 26 different companies. And then I have a small amount in cryptocurrency, like $500. Like it's about 0.5% of my portfolio. And then REITs makes up the final 3.5% or whatever's left. How did you overcome fear? Oh my goodness, Catalina, this is a great question. How do you overcome fear to pursue your goals? You will never, I'm guessing, unless you are a super confident, cocky kind of person, you will probably never stop feeling imposter syndrome where you're trying to push your own boundaries. And as a result of that, you're like, well, I've never been here before. So how on earth can I consider myself to be an expert or able or qualified or whatever, insert whatever confident word you want here. How can I ever go into that area? I found that with like writing my children's book, like even though I've already published a book, I've been teaching personal finance for years. I'm very involved in the financial independence community. I still felt a lot of imposter syndrome around this idea of putting a book out there for kids, mostly because I'm like, well, I don't have a kid myself in that age range. So it's for 3 to 8-year-olds. And then I'm not an elementary school teacher. I got a B in English in high school. Actually, it was a C by the end. So my GPA dropped down to a C by the end. And I was like, well, what right does that give me to write a book? And the thing is that you can do almost anything in this world by hiring the right people or outsourcing different parts of it. All it takes to be sellable is basically be better than everyone around you, and even just marginally better. You only have to be one step ahead of the people around you to make a business out of selling your skills or your product to them. So yeah, it's not something that you really get over, I would say, Catalina, but if you're comfortable and you're not feeling that fear, imposter syndrome, sense of discomfort, then you're probably not growing enough either. I feel like that's something you should always be chasing too. Jessica, how did I start learning more about investing in stocks? So as I said, when I was a kid, like I had that curiosity. I kind of wanted to own stocks when I was maybe 7, 8, 9 years old and didn't know how to do it. And I'm not even sure if you could have done it as easily as you can today. I think you may have still had to go to a stockbroker at that time. So you would have gone to an actual like stockbroker physical store or called them up and then said, I want to place an order for this stock. And you would have had to have like a lump of cash ready to go for that. Versus now, like with apps like Robinhood or M1 Finance, like you can just basically log on yourself and buy it. Like there's no barrier to doing it. How I learned, I started by doing. So my first stock was in Manchester United. For those of you who are soccer fans, like that's a soccer team in England who are publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Terrible stock, awful company. But I said, I'm going to put $50 in and I'm going to start learning how stocks work. And that was my first stock. And I sold it probably a month later when I realized that it was like losing money instead of gaining money, or it wasn't going anywhere. But the key was to start with small amounts of money. And then I was learning all the time through podcasts, through books, through different conversations I was having with people. That's kind of how I recommend learning about anything, is start doing it and then pick up as much as you can along the way as well. Hardest aspect of diving into entrepreneurial ventures is probably saying no to 90% of the ones you come up with. I feel like I'm still overstretching myself in terms of the amount of things I'm trying to do right now. And if I don't keep that in check, my personal life will suffer, or my family life will suffer, or my fitness, health will suffer. Like you're constantly going to have a balancing act. And going into real estate, I'm sure, is going to be the same thing. Like you're going to have to figure out, how much time do I want to put into this, or how much time am I going to allow it to take up? Am I going to start outsourcing parts of it so I don't have to use my own time on it? Where does this fit in with a family, with health, with friends? It's kind of like when you're in school and you've got the S's that you can be really good at. So sports, social life, school, and sleep. And someone told me you can only really do 2 of those really well. So pick which 2 you're going to do really well, focus on those, and the others are going to have to kind of fall backwards. And I think that kind of goes very true with adult life as well, except you add in things like family, you add in things like your own personal health, which you don't have to worry about as much in high school, I feel like. Favorite book to read for financial education. I recommend The Richest Man in Babylon every single year to my students, and I force them to do it as a book study, and they hate me for it in the beginning. So like, this language really is terrible. Like it's like old Shakespearean language. And then within like 10 pages, they're like, oh, wow, this is like the best book I've ever read. And I hate reading. And a lot of times people don't like reading because they just haven't read something yet that actually is meaningful to them. So Richest Man in Babylon is up there. The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins is one of my favorites as well. The Millionaire Next Door, even though it's an older book, it's still, a really great book. I don't have any good recommendations for real estate investing, so I would love to know your recommendations based on what you guys have read. what process did you use to write your workbook and how much work was it? It was way more work than I thought it was going to be. It started off as we were doing an entrepreneurship project in my school. So I was having my students come up with their own businesses, and more than just like a business plan. Like, we actually don't do business plans. We come up with an idea and we start it almost immediately. And you start free, you start cheap, you start fast, and then you start building the business that your customers actually want. So what I was doing was every couple of days, I was coming up with like almost like a guided notes worksheet for my students, because they were working in teams. I was like, I need something that they can just kind of attach to guide their thinking, because I didn't want to stand in the front of the room and lecture and keep them all moving at the same pace. They were all moving in different paces because they were all doing different businesses. And those kind of series of worksheets kind of formed the bones of a workbook. And then I pitched it to Choosify Publishing. They said yes. And then came the process of actually filling out the text. So kind of like giving more information based on like what I was giving in the classroom. So kind of like replacing me. And then a ton of editing, a ton of cutting stuff out, putting more stuff in. I hated the sight of my book by the end of it. And if you ever do write a book, you will probably feel that way about it by the time it's done, because you've just been looking at it over and over and over again, especially when you proofread it. But now that it's done and it's out in the world, I'm like, you know what? I wrote a book and I got published. And that's something that I'm really proud of, even though like looking at it now, I wrote it 2 years ago. I'm like, it's not my best piece of work. There's a lot I would do differently, but it's out there and it's done. And that's the key when it comes to doing a book or a project or anything like that. Get it done. Get it done. You'll always do better. You'll always look back on it and be like, you know what, that wasn't my best work, but it probably will be better in the future. Jacob, you have a podcast, right?
Yep, that's correct.
What do you think of your first episode?
Didn't like it.
And you'll always look back on it and you'll feel that same way, but man, you started, and that's what's so impressive. And you leave that out there and you can see that growth happen. So for those of you guys who are going to try something, your first effort is probably not going to be the best, and you just got to go with it. Ben, what's one skill or trait you believe every entrepreneur needs to have in order to attain their goals? Ooh. I feel like you just got to have that open mind that anything, like you can pretty much be an entrepreneur by just solving a problem. I think that's the mindset shift that most people have to make. And once you start figuring that out, entrepreneurship kind of, it's one of those things that grows as you do it. You know, I'm on my 7th or 8th business right now with the children's workbook, and it's definitely way better than any of the other ventures I've done before, just because it's come after all of those other ventures. And I'm starting to realize that ideas are everywhere, like that you will hear people complaining all the time. There are problems always in society, and there's no shortage of people who are willing to complain about them and basically give you business ideas. So once you start listening to those and thinking like, okay, how could I solve this problem? If you can come up with a solution that someone might be willing to pay for, you've got a business. And then the key is just like, which one do I want to do? Like, because you've got multiple ones at that point. Which one lights me up? Which one do I feel like doing? Seth, how has your mindset changed in pursuing financial independence? I think in the beginning it was get out of debt. And that was like get rid of a car payment, get rid of my student loans. My wife had a car payment as well. We had a personal loan to a family member. So like it was kind of like just get out of debt first, because I hated that feeling of being in debt. And then once that happened, all that was left was the mortgage. I was like, now this entrepreneurship idea really excites me, because I can't cut my expenses much more. Like we weren't living bare bones by any stretch, but we had gotten to a point where we were at the lowest point we were comfortable going with. Like my wife is the one who will push back and say, there's no point in doing this financial independence thing if we're going to live a miserable life until we get to that point. You can't just do that and then flip a switch and then suddenly life's going to be amazing. There have been people who have done that, and they usually regret it when they do it. Because they lose relationships, they lose their health, they feel like they missed out on years of having fun or enjoying their life. So we have a healthy balance of enjoying life and then saving for financial independence as well. But entrepreneurship means that you can basically, there's no ceiling on how much money you can make. So for me, like finding different ways to bring in active income and then also passive income has been one of my goals that I think was a more recent mindset for me. Wyatt, when I first started being interested in investing, I was mainly interested in stocks and index funds. However, this past year, I started focusing on real estate because you can use the numbers to quantify a value, which allows you to safely leverage your money. Okay. Yep. My question is, how are you able to grow your portfolio faster than just compounding interest from dividend reinvestment? Hold on. This is a very long question. I'm losing track of it. My question is, how are you able to grow your portfolio faster than just compounding interest from dividend reinvestment, or are you able to safely leverage your stock portfolio using margins? Wyatt, total honesty, I've never ventured into margins. I haven't done options. I haven't done margins. I don't actually understand fully how they work, and I haven't given the time yet to figure it out. And it's one of those things where my brother-in-law has started doing it. My brother has started doing it. And it makes me really nervous because when the average person starts doing this stuff and seems to think they know what they're doing, I always kind of question, like, is there a big bubble that's about to burst? And Warren Buffett has that famous saying, like, be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. And that stemmed from the time when his shoe shine boy was giving him stock tips or sharing his thoughts about the stock market. And he was kind of like, average person is way too confident about their own knowledge at the moment. And that's a sign that a bubble is about to burst. So for me, yeah, I'm very boring in terms of my investing. Individual stocks is kind of where the exciting stuff is for me. But yeah, I just invest in index funds. There is dividend reinvestment. And in my individual stocks, I avoid dividends because I don't want that extra income. So I look for growth stocks that aren't paying a dividend most of the time. And then any ones that do have a dividend, those are in my retirement accounts where it doesn't matter if they pay a dividend or not, because it's all in a retirement account, which will be taxed separately anyway. What significant challenges have you overcome with your simple startup business? The first one was COVID, that I released a workbook in February of 2020, and I thought I was going to sell it to schools. And then schools closed in March and everyone's budgets disappeared. So my entire target market was gone. So that's when I started looking at, what are some other things I could do? And that's when the summer camp idea came up. I was like, well, all summer camps are canceled. I think that there might be a demand for a virtual summer camp just because parents are probably like unsure of what to do with their kids over the summer. So I thought maybe a virtual entrepreneurship camp might work. So what I did was I set up a Eventbrite page. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Eventbrite is just like an online ticketing system. And you can set up an event. You can charge people for a ticket to that event. So I set up a entrepreneurship summer camp for 10 to 18-year-olds. And I said it was going to be 6 weeks. It was going to teach kids how to start a business and actually do it. And that was it. Like, I didn't actually have any course or any plan beyond that. And I just said, I'm going to test this idea. I'm going to see if anyone actually wants it or not. I picked a price out of thin air. I just said, there aren't really any entrepreneurship summer camps out there right now that I can base this on. So I'm going to go with $80. And I sold out the camp in 2 weeks. And I was like, oh crap, now I have to actually make it. So within a month, I threw together like recorded videos in my basement. So like I put a camera up and I had a light and I recorded, like, again, looking back, they're terrible videos, but at the time they were fine. And threw together a bare bones course. It went really well. I had demand for another, so I ran another. So that was kind of the challenge. And I took the challenge as an opportunity to find a space to grow elsewhere. Daniel, interested in your affiliation with Choosify. How did you become associated with Brad and Jonathan? What advice do you have for us when it comes to providing value? That's a really great question. And it kind of goes with the advice as well. I was looking to teach personal finance. My school was using the Dave Ramsey curriculum. That's what the teacher before me was doing. So basically you put in a DVD, the kids have a workbook. Dave rants for 40 minutes and you fill in the blanks. It was like the most boring class I've ever seen, even though the content was good. So I was like, I want to do something different. I want to actually like facilitate learning and be part of that. I just couldn't find anything out there that was really good. That was like talking about financial independence. It wasn't just like never use credit cards, never get a loan, never do this. Like, financial independence has so much more. So I reached out to Brad and Jonathan. Like, I think I contacted Brad and I said, I'm going to be down in Richmond for a soccer tournament because I was playing soccer at the time and we had a tournament down in Richmond. I knew they were in Richmond. And I was like, can I, take you out for lunch and talk to you about this idea that I have? And the World Cup final was on that day too, which helped. And I knew he was a soccer fan from listening to the podcast. So I was like, we'll watch the World Cup final. We'll talk for a sec. And to my surprise, he actually answered the email, first of all. And then he said, yeah. So I met him and I told him, like, I want to create this curriculum. you don't have anything like this, but your mission is kind of about financial education. Would you be interested in partnering on making this thing? And the reason I wanted to partner was that they were going to have better technology. They were going to have paid subscriptions for things. And then obviously advertising it afterwards, there's just a bigger market that they can reach than I can on my own. So that's what I ended up doing and how I got involved with them. And that started as a volunteer position. So I volunteered with them for a year and a half before they came to me and said, look, we love what you're doing. We want to keep you on. We want to hire you. And they offered me a paid position then. Even though I wasn't asking for it, I was still happy to volunteer. So like that was an interesting turn of events that I wasn't expecting. But the advice then would be, people are actually pretty reachable if you take a shot. Reach out to people, let them know who you are, what you're doing, why you're reaching out to them, and see if like they will collaborate with you and can you add value to their lives. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. Like, what value can you give to them? And a lot of times you'll struggle to be like, well, how do I offer a celebrity of some sort or a major influencer in my space? How do I offer them value? And you'll have to think about it because like each person will be different. But if you can find a way to offer them value, or just say like, I'm really interested in learning from you, can I take you out to lunch? There's the value. I'm going to pay for your lunch or a coffee, or when you're over 21, you can offer take them out for a beer. Like whatever option you choose, I think there's something to that. And a lot of people really are flattered and appreciate people reaching out to them. Now, there is a difference, like your 1 million subscriber influencers, followers, like they probably are a little over hit with people reaching out to them, but like the mid-tier ones are usually very accessible in places like Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, DMs, Facebook DMs. Like you can actually reach a lot of people that way. So I would challenge yourself to try and reach somebody you're actually really curious to talk to. Interested in hearing about the curriculum. So the curriculum is a pre-K through 12 personal finance curriculum. So it's, we started with high school and we said, what skills do people need to actually survive in the real world and thrive and build wealth and reach financial independence? So that was kind of like our end goal. And then we backward mapped that all the way down to pre-K, thinking like, okay, so what would we learn in high school? Cool, got that. What could we learn in middle school that would inform that? Got it. What we learn in elementary school that informs that, and so on. Because actually most financial habits are made between the ages of 3 and 9. So if between the ages of 3 and 9, you figure out pretty much like, what are my attitudes, beliefs, values going to be around money? And you build some habits around that. And then if you realize that those aren't good habits, you have to break them later and change them into something else. So if we can target that younger age group and actually get them to build positive relationships with money, attitudes, beliefs, mindset around wealth, saving, earning, those sorts of things, like that's, I think, where we're really going to change the world. And that's one of the reasons why I was bringing out my kids' book. It's one of the reasons why we went all the way down to pre-K in our curriculum as well. Sean, what does your financial independence plan look like? How did you come up with this plan, and when do you plan on diversifying to real estate? Okay, so FI plan at the moment, it's annual expenses times 25 is how much money you would need to have invested in something that throws off either interest or stocks. So like if we were just looking at my retirement accounts, I would need 1.2 million in my retirement accounts in like broad-based US index funds. So earning around 7 to 8% per year, that would allow me to live off of 4. So if I took 4% of that out, that would be I think it's 45,000 is the number I used. So $45,000 per year to live off of. And that would cover my wife and I and my son's annual expenses, and not just like bare expenses, like, but a pretty decent life, like about what we're living right now. And then the key for me was, well, how do I accelerate that process? So you invest faster, or you create sources of income, which is where real estate investing is so cool as well, because for every bit of money that you have coming in from rental income or from the sale of properties, the less you have to actually invest and reach to get to financial independence. So as I'm adding in books, as I'm adding in courses, I'm having monthly income that comes in, and that reduces the amount that I'm going to have to cover from my portfolio. So for me, it's like, well, how can I bring more income in that will go through retirement as well, and reduce the amount I have to actually save so that I can get to financial independence faster? Did I answer that question fully? How did I come up with this plan? I heard the 25 4% rules, so 25 times your annual expenses. And I was like, okay, there's a starting spot. So that just became like the first goal. And then I started teasing it into like different areas. And then real estate investing, soon, probably, I would imagine my first real estate investment is actually probably going to be the current townhouse I live in. So my wife and I have our like plan, in quotation marks, plans always change, but the plan when we bought this place was we will live here for 7 years, so that by the time our son is ready to go into elementary school, we will move to whatever neighborhood we actually want to be in, because the school system we're in right now is not the most amazing in the world. And I would imagine that the townhouse we're currently living in will probably stay in our possession, become a rental property. So we might get the equity back out of the home again to put a down payment on the next spot. But we're kind of past that point now where my wife's not interested in house hacking, I should say, not even we. Like, I would do it probably, but my wife is not. And it's why I wish I'd gotten this information at your age, because at your age, hell yes, I would have house hacked. Like, buy a place, rent out every bedroom in that place, or get a multifamily. I would have lived in the tent in the backyard just to rent out every room in there. Like, that would have been really appealing to me in my college age years to do something like that. So I hope you guys are considering, getting ahead of yourselves like that with real estate investing. Just start reading Rich Man in Babylon. I mean, it will take you like 2 hours to read Rich Man in Babylon. It's only 100 pages or so, depending on which edition you get, but awesome lessons in there. I do recommend it to anyone who has not read it yet. And you can usually find like free PDFs online. You can find the audiobook typically like for free, because it's an older book. It went into public domain, so anyone and everyone can produce their own edition of it as long as they change it a little bit. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self? This is a classic question and a great question. Catalina, you're on it tonight with questions. How can we learn to take things slow when we want everything now? Dilemma. Yeah, and that's where my wife is the better half of me for that kind of thing, because I probably would be nose to the grindstone, working all the time to try and get there faster. And she's the one that kind of reminds me, like, you got to live life at the same time. But advice to my 20-year-old self, I mean, I would, if I was starting at 20, house hack would have been my first move to try and get some sort of property. Even if I was just managing a property for someone else and I was subleasing to roommates and just getting my housing for free, that would have been a very appealing thing to me. And I could have done that in college so easily. Like, there was landlords who were looking to rent out to college students. If I had been the first one in and said, look, I'll rent it at this price and I need to be allowed to sublease it to other people, and you can vet them if you want, but I need to be allowed to sublease, and I set the price for that. I think the finder's fee for finding the other kids to sublease would have been enough for me to get the apartment for free. So yeah, that's one that I definitely would have gone back and said. At 20 years old, I think the biggest advice I give my students after the whole house hacking thing is, when you get your first big kid job, like you finished college and you're starting that first step into your career, or if you haven't done college and you're just going straight into career, try not to inflate your expenses to match your salary. Set your savings rate from the beginning, make it automatic. So you just chop it off the top of your paycheck and then live off of what's left. Like, if you on day one can set your savings rate to whatever you want it to be, so 20, 30, 40, 50%, and then you just learn to live off what's left, you'll never miss it. That's the thing. Like, you will start, like, you could start at an $80,000 a year job or a $30,000 a year job. You'll find a way to make it work. So if you have the $80,000 job, or $80,000 a year job, and you just chop half of it off and live off of 40, you'll never know the difference anyway. You are used to being a high school student making nothing, or a poor college student. It doesn't change anything. And then you would smash it getting to financial independence. What is my net worth cash flow goals? I guess my goals are more cash flow. That can I fund everything I want to do? I don't have like I need to be worth 2 million, $10 million in my head. Like, that doesn't appeal to me in the slightest. Same thing with entrepreneurship. I have no interest in starting a company that's worth multi-million dollars. There's two types of entrepreneurs. One's a lifestyle entrepreneur, where they just want a business that helps them fulfill their lifestyle and fits into their lifestyle. And then there's the one who wants to make it their full-time career, and they want to grow it to something really big and then sell it for a lot of money in the future, or become like one of those legacy people that you hear about in the news. So for me, like, I'm more interested in the lifestyle entrepreneurship. So I start businesses that only require a couple of hours a week, fit into my evenings or weekends when my son is asleep, my wife is doing her own business or whatever it is. Like those are the kind of businesses I start. So that's really always been my goal, is to fund the lifestyle that we want to live. So in terms of net worth, the number changes because every month my passive income gets higher, which reduces the amount of money we need to save for financial independence. So it's hard to answer that one, but I would say our net worth right now, without counting our house, because I don't typically count that, is about 100,000. I think we're just about to cross the 100,000 mark. How do I deal with productivity ruts? Oh, this happens a lot. Or lack of motivation. There are parts of my business that I don't like doing. Like there's plenty of that, especially, and you'll find that with entrepreneurship, with real estate investing as well. There's going to be parts of it that are like, this is so boring. This is so tedious. This is really annoying. Don't want to do that. In the beginning, you probably aren't going to make enough money to hire somebody else to do that for you. So you do have to find ways to push yourselves through that. And I'm sure most of you have felt that in school at some point as well. Like there are parts of school that are just like not very appealing to do. My tactic for that is I allow myself a day to feel that way. So if I'm like, you know what, I'm not feeling very productive today, I'm pretty much like, you know what, you've done tons already. You've ticked a lot of your to-do list. Take a day, come back to it tomorrow and see how you feel. The other one is make sure your to-do list is not these like really big things that take a ton of time to do. Like say you're going to start a business and you're like, step one, build website. Build website is actually like a multi-week task that you need to do. Like it's not going to be done in 10 minutes. So breaking it down into like write copy for a homepage, figure out the layout that you want to have, like those sorts of things, like make small little goals. And yes, it will make your list longer, but it's much easier when you're not feeling motivated to go tick off something that only takes 5 minutes compared to something that would take 5 hours. All right. If I can reasonably get 10 to 15% in real estate and have debt at 5% interest, would you pay off the debt or invest? My rule of thumb is if the debt is less than 6% interest, I'm comfortable going into the stock market and saying I can do better. And you're kind of doing the same thing with real estate. You're saying I can do better. So 6% is my personal cutoff. I always tell everyone it's a personal decision. Like Brad Barrett, Choosify, like he easily could have kept his mortgage. His mortgage was under 5%, but he decided to pay it off. I'm not accelerating my mortgage payment for that very reason. We have a 4.25% interest mortgage rate. I probably could have refinanced into something cheaper, but because my wife and I are questioning like how long we're going to be in this property and what we're going to do with it, we just said we'll leave it at 4.25%, but we're not overpaying on our mortgage. Instead, the extra stuff is going into the stock market or into developing our businesses. So like my wife also runs an Etsy shop. So she's got her own entrepreneurial spirit that's starting to break out as well. Has your financial summer camp become passive for this year? Almost. I do. So I've whittled it down to 2 in-person camps that require my time and attention each year. So a summer one and a winter one. So the summer one's going to start on the 24th of June. It's a 6-week program. And during that 6 weeks, I'm committing to appearing on webinars twice per week for an hour. So that's pretty much my time commitment, and then getting into a chat room and answering questions. I've also then set up an on-demand version of the course. So it's all the video lessons that I normally do, but no webinars. And I have that at a lower price point, and that runs itself. Like I do nothing for that. There is a community feature, an online community, and it's made up of all of the current participants, like say in summer or winter challenges, and then all the past participants as well. So I'm constantly adding people to this community, and they are supporting each other in there. So it's kind of like those best chat rooms that you go into, like the organizer of the chat room or the Facebook group or whatever is not the biggest voice in the room. The biggest voices are actually the people who are in the group. So that's what I've been trying to foster and create, and it requires very little from me. So that business is actually becoming more and more passive with each year. All right, last one. What do you think about lending money at high interest and short-term versus long-term stock market investing? I have not ventured into peer-to-peer lending. So peer-to-peer lending, for anyone who's not familiar, you would go into an app or a website like LendingTree and say, like, I'm willing to loan people money at a higher interest rate. And the reason that they're using that website is probably because they cannot get a traditional loan. So they are possibly going to have lower credit scores, higher risk loans, but you also get to charge more interest because of that. particularly in today's climate, like loaning money is not probably a great game to be in because the baseline for interest is so low. Now, if you're talking about like buying bonds from like corporate bonds or municipal bonds, like that's a little bit different. So if you're doing bonds, you're loaning somebody money, but it's usually a government or a corporation that's borrowing it from you. And it's not as lucrative as stocks, or at least as what I think I can do with stocks in terms of US based index funds and then individual stocks as well. When you reach financial freedom and can earn more passive revenue than expenses, do you plan on quitting your job? Or you plan to keep it up? My FI life goal would be to become nomadic. So pretty much sell our house and start traveling the world and slow traveling the world. I see these other FI bloggers who are like living in one location for like 3 to 6 months or a year and then moving on to the next one. That actually sounds really appealing to my wife and I, particularly when our son is younger. We were considering maybe like homeschooling for kindergarten, first, second grade, maybe, and then like inserting him into school in third grade. So before it's like too late and you're like, okay, we're probably going to have some social awkwardness as a result of this. But we think that we're going to hit financial independence probably in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, last questions came in. Can you tell us about crypto and do you have any plans to diversify into the asset class? What I can tell you about crypto is what I've done through my own knowledge and research. So blockchain technology sounds really exciting to me. So the idea that there's a public ledger out there that every computer is responsible for maintaining, and it seems to be very hard to, it's impossible at the moment to actually create a forgery in there. So that's what's really exciting to me is this blockchain technology. Cryptocurrency itself, jury's out for me. Like, I don't know. I own some of it because I had that 10% of my investing portfolio is allowed to go into whatever. And I'm curious. I want to learn more about it. Same way I started with stocks. I'm like, okay, first step, how do I buy it? And I set up a Coinbase account and I bought $100 of Bitcoin and $100 of Ethereum to start. I did own Dogecoin too for a little while. And that was before Elon Musk started tweeting about it at all. I don't even know who told me about it, but someone was like, oh, this Dogecoin thing, you should check it out. And I put $50 into it. I heard a podcast episode on NPR, Planet Money, probably, where they interviewed the guy who actually made it. And he's like, this is kind of a joke. I wasn't really expecting it to go anywhere. It's kind of why it's called what it is. I don't get it, why people are buying it. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I'm selling this thing. And at that moment was when Dogecoin kind of went to the moon. So my $50 turned into 500. And I was like, well, this was dumb luck, but I'm going to sell this now. Or I sold half of it. So I pocketed $250, left the other 250 in there. I was like, let's see what this thing does. And it went up again. And I had a limit sell on it. So I made like another $400 off it or something like that. But that's dumb luck. There was no skill. There was no knowledge. There's nothing behind that. So like cryptocurrency, it's decentralized. The idea is that there is no government agency who is in charge of this. Or the problem with our current currency, so with the dollar, is that there are two entities in the US that are basically control everything. You have the Federal Reserve and you have the US government. And the Federal Reserve is actually not regulated by the US government. They are their own separate entity. They are probably the most powerful entity in the world because they own the money. They control the money that goes to the US government, which is one of the most powerful entities in the world. So, the idea that you can basically just push a button and say, oh, well, we're going to print more money right now, is kind of like, that's what cryptocurrency is sort of trying to fight, is this idea that, somebody can just decide, well, we're going to print more when we need more. Because if you think about debt, if you increase the amount of currency in the country and inflation goes up, all of that debt is now easier to repay because the dollar amount is actually worth less in terms of what it can buy in today's money. So I'm very intrigued by cryptocurrency. I think there is a place for it. Do I know which one is going to be the cryptocurrency or if there's going to be more than one? Absolutely not. Bitcoin has a head start. It's been around longer. The limit of 21 million Bitcoin by the time it's done is intriguing because, it doesn't seem like there's a way to make more of it. I like Ethereum a lot because of the blockchain technology. It seems like a lot of the blockchain innovation is being done on Ethereum's network. And beyond that, I got nothing. Thoughts on inflation and making moves to prepare for it. I'm really interested to see where inflation's going right now. I think inflation in the month of May was 0.5% in just the month alone. And over the past year, I think it's been over 5% in a lot of key areas. So I mean, you talk about things like lumber, it's insane how much that has gone up in value. But I noticed like my weekly grocery shop has gone up a lot. Going to a restaurant is more expensive, and it has been since COVID started. So there's definitely some inflation stuff going on in the world right now. And it's interesting to see whether it's going to stay or not. In terms of making plans to prepare for it, I don't save my money to try and get to financial independence. I invest for it. So if that is going to be the case and inflation is going to happen, then having your money invested and working for you at a higher rate than inflation is the only way you can protect yourself. I'm not buying gold either and burying that in my backyard. Crypto is, I guess, a hedge against inflation, but I don't trust it enough yet to do that.
All right, Rob, we're going to cut off there. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I want to highlight a couple of things you said, and you said you had some really great answers to some good questions. Kudos to the members for asking some great.
They were great questions.
Yeah. You mentioned that the first time you do something, you basically suck at it. Everybody does. Whether that's your first podcast, your first YouTube video, your first book, your first, I always think about riding your bike for the first time, and you basically fall and land on your face. But unless you do that first one, you can't get better. And so this group is filled with a bunch of hustlers. They have the fear. The fear is always there, but for whatever reason, the people on this call, they conquer their fear and they just go for it. And I think they know that failing is part of the process, and failure is a good thing. Because you learn and you grow and you become more confident with failure. It's weird to say that, but you do.
Yeah.
And so I'm just adding on to what Rob said. Go out there and fail. Try that thing that you think you're not good enough for. And Rob, you said the imposter syndrome. I think I wrote a book for Bigger Pockets. It's coming out later. Multiple times during that process, I thought, who am I to write a book? Like,
yeah, who's going to want to read your book?
Yeah. Even though I've taught teenagers for 18 years, I know personal finance inside and out. I know a lot about financial independence. I still thought, who's going to buy a book that I wrote? And what if it sucks? Like, or what if I fail? Or what if it only sells 2 copies, my mom and my wife? Like, that's it. But you just have that fear and you just go for it. I think that's an inherent trait that some people have and some people don't. I absolutely am confident everybody on this call has that trait, or they wouldn't be here. But you just got to maximize it, man. Fail, fail, fail.
And I think like if you go into things not expecting to fail, but certainly being aware that there's a high risk of it, you do things that protect yourself from that. So like Dan, with your book, I'm guessing you didn't do this as your first venture and you haven't put your life savings into it. And you're like, fingers crossed, man, I need to make money on this thing. I'm guessing like if it failed and it only sold 2 copies, you're going to pretty much be like, okay, that sucks, but you know what? It's not going to break me. When it comes to your first real estate investment, over plan for the costs, like whatever you think the costs are, add a safety net to that. Make sure you have an emergency fund in place for when those things go wrong that you just weren't expecting, because you don't have the experience behind you. Or go into deals with people who have more experience than you and let that be the training wheels. So like, your emergency fund is your helmet, knee pads, elbow pads when you're riding that bike. The training wheels make that transition a little bit easier. Like, insert your own metaphor there, but you've got idea that, I'm probably not going to do my best version of this the first time around. What things can I put in place to reduce the risk of it going badly for me? So like I can make it a learning process and not this was a total catastrophe kind of thing. Hey, look at that, Dan. You're going to sell at least 6 copies.
There you go. It was worth it. Those 2 years of writing and editing, and Rob, I'm with you, man. The editing process, I had no idea. And it's still going on. I actually have 2 books coming out with Bigger Pockets. The second one is kind of like yours. It's kind of a workbook / planner. And I'm editing that right now as we speak. I'm about halfway through it. It is not fun. it's much more fun to write it than to edit it. And then I send it to them and they send it back to me and ask me to edit some more stuff. And then it kind of goes back and forth. But it is going to be worth it because it's going to help a lot of people, I hope.
Why do you think I wrote a children's book as my second book? Because there's only 34 pages in it and each page only has like 20 words. So the worst they can do is say, we need you to fix a page. And I was like, okay, well, that'll take 5 minutes. So yeah, children's book, much easier in terms of like the formatting, editing side of things. The problem is, of course, that you have a very different target market and you're trying to like cater to adults and kids at the same time. And you're trying to think about like, well, what language do kids use? Is this the right language? Am I writing in a colloquial way that only some people will understand? Makes it harder, but definitely easier to edit.
Yeah, I think I might have to, note to self, children's book next. 100 words instead of 70,000 words. That sounds a lot better.
I think a book for this age range would probably be really interesting too.
Yeah.
Making presentations for private money sucks. Tell me more. So Jabbar, what have you done for presentations for private money and why does it suck?
Oh, I've just been basically trying to build up like my introduction to what I'm offering. And it's not an enjoyable process because I'm trying to make it understandable to people who aren't real estate investors. Because I've been presenting it to like my personal sphere. And it's difficult for me to do like the breakdown because it forces me to kind of have to like really ponder and think about how people will receive what I'm presenting.
Yeah, that is a really great point that when you are finding investors for real estate, most often you're finding people who don't actually want to invest in it themselves. Like they just want to kind of hand somebody money and say like, go make me more. And you're trying to convince them that you are the right person to do it. And this is the right property. Same thing in a business. Like if you're trying to find like an angel investor or a venture capital firm. So those are the kind of the two groups that will throw money at you. A lot of times they won't have a clue how your business works because they made their money doing something else. And you're gonna have to really break it down for them to convince them that you're the right person to invest in. If you guys do like books, I just finished one that was recommended to me by a friend and very successful friend, serial entrepreneur. Like this is total name dropping, but he's like, oh, I just went to my like Harvard meetup and the people he was hanging around with like is the guy who's going to take over Amazon. Like, is it Jesse Adams? I don't even know his name, but like that's the group he hangs out with. He started like multi-million-dollar companies like, oh, you need to read this book. And I was like, okay, well, I will listen to you because you've made a ton of money. That book was called The Investable Entrepreneur by James Church. And it wasn't a super hard read, but it was all about raising capital as a business owner. I have no interest in doing that. Like, I don't want to start a multi-million-dollar company where I need to raise millions of dollars in investment, but I'm going to run a Kickstarter campaign for my kids' book. And it's the exact same thing. You are pitching people on a venture. You want them to take a shot on you when the product is not there yet. And you have to teach them, you have to inform them, you have to build trust, you have to build authority. And then at the end of the day, you have to convince them to part with their money. And I think it's a really good book to read just for anybody who's kind of thinking about doing something like that, where you're raising money for something. I'll put it in the chat.
Awesome, Rob. Well, thanks for joining us. Once you have that book in the chat, The Investable Entrepreneur, I think you said, perfect. We'll let you go, Rob. I want to respect your time, let you get back to your family and your kiddo. I don't know if I told you, Rob, but my wife and I had a baby boy 5 weeks ago.
Well, clearly you did, because you've told me 3 times now, and you're clearly going through dad brain right now. Because yeah, it's like that first couple of weeks, you have no clue what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
You're lucky he turned up tonight, because seriously, I missed so many meetings after my son was born.
Yeah. I immediately before this meeting, I was taking an hour-long nap, and it wasn't an option. It had well, awesome, Rob. Thanks so much for joining us. The rest of you stick around for a couple minutes. I have an announcement to make. Rob will let you go. Thanks so much again. We'll be in touch. And
one thing I didn't say, if anyone wants to reach out, you are more than welcome to. I've already had Jacob reach out and ask about, just questions and being on his podcast. And I am more than happy to help support you in whatever way I can. And whatever way my time allows me to. Like, I will definitely find times to fit you in, whether it's a chat, whether it's a conversation, interview, whatever it is. So you can reach me on LinkedIn. You can reach me on I guess I'll put channels in here. So on Instagram or Facebook, you'll find me on that page at M's for Money Book. On Twitter, I am Phi Educator. And if you want to just send me an email, because that's one I should have led with. I'm at rob@simplestartup.com. But yeah, reach out if you have questions. If you want to chat about any particular topic, if there's a way that I can help you, let me know. All right, I'll leave you there. Good luck, guys.
Thanks, Rob. Take care, man.
And if you like this video and want to see more like it, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You should also go check out our website and Instagram, which are both linked below this video. Thanks again for watching. Now go and get your freak on.